So welcome to Unstick Your Productivity. I like Ryan's thing there just as we start. I like it when they kick the ball really far. Love it. So welcome to Unstick Your Productivity. This was billed as a Graham session, but it's actually a Graham and Grace session today. Very pleased to have my fellow Think Productive Productivity Ninja, fellow author, all-round good human, Grace Marshall, on this as well. And really, we started, we've for about a year or so, we've been doing these webinars pretty regularly as a kind of free resource. And it feels like in September, the topic that everyone is kind of thinking about is how do you get back in, how do you kind of get back into the groove? People have been away on holiday, and it feels like September and the start of kind of autumn is a time where people really want to make a lot of traction, make a lot of stuff happen quite quickly. So we thought we'd just talk about being stuck and being unstuck and how to get momentum. If you've not come across this before, so I'm Graham Allcott. I'm the founder of Think Productive, the author of How to Be a Productivity Ninja. There's my contact details there. And also the host of the Beyond Busy podcast. If you're not subscribed to Beyond Busy, that's the podcast where we interview interesting people about how they view productivity, work-life balance, and how they define happiness and success in their lives. So basically, we just ask the big questions. So if you want to sign up for Beyond Busy, we'd love to have you subscribed. And my colleague, Grace Marshall, over to you.
Yes, so I am part of the Productivity team with Graham. So I run some of the Productivity Ninja workshops. And as well as that, I do coaching and writing. So those are my books on there and my contact details on the screen as well.
Cool. Now, at Think Productive, we have a whole variety of different ways that we approach productivity in general. One way to just kind of summarize that approach is to show you the 9 characteristics of the Productivity Ninja. Some of you will be really familiar with the 9 characteristics and you've read the book and so on. Some of you will be seeing that for the first time. But when we start to think about September and unsticking and really kind of getting into quality work, there's a couple of characteristics there that I just want to really quickly flag. Zen-like calm is the art of being present and in the moment and, really focusing on one thing at a time. And really everything that we're going to talk about today is about supporting that state of Zen-like calm, the state that psychologists often refer to as flow as well. You might have heard that word, but just this idea of being present and in the moment, and it feels like time falls away because you're just so engrossed in what you're doing. I think that's a really important, thing. It's kind of the opposite of being stuck, right? So that having that momentum, feeling in flow, is really the opposite of being stuck. And I suppose the other one that I just want to highlight on the back end of that is human, not superhero. No one gets this perfect all of the time, and I'm going to just ask you to share your questions in that spirit. So no one's here because they're perfect at productivity, because that is impossible. And so, really that's the kind of starting point for us. Is we don't have a guru approach. We have a very human, realistic approach that just accepts that sometimes we all screw this stuff up and it's hard. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight those two. I'm just going to give you a couple of quick thoughts about being stuck, getting unstuck, and then we're going to go straight into Q&A, and most of the session is going to be Q&A. But one of the things I wanted to just talk about really briefly is the idea of procrastination, and in particular where that comes from, the lizard brain, the part of our brain that if you get the scientific labels for this, it's the amygdala, it's part of the limbic system, but often referred to as the lizard brain. And what it really is about is the kind of fight or flight, very kind of basic human instincts part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that deals with jealousy. It's the part of the brain that deals with hunger, reproduction, and also fear. So anything where you feel like I'm stuck because I'm so worried about the consequence of this, or I'm stuck because I'm so bored about doing this. The lizard brain is where we get those kind of lazy thoughts, and also where we get those kind of fearful thoughts as well. So it's just a really important thing to be aware of. And we need to kind of be aware of our own thinking and think about our own thinking in order to solve some of those things. How do we do that? We make space for what matters. This is one of my sort of favorite phrases, really, making space for what matters. It's really my definition of productivity as a whole. Productivity is about making space for what matters. And what I mean by that is a couple of different things. So firstly, being really good at productivity and having a really good system in place around how you do this stuff allows you to to clock off and have a life and have balance and everything else that goes along with that, because that stuff matters too. But also when we talk about making space for what matters, what we're really talking about is quality thinking. Henry Ford has this lovely quote that thinking is the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason so few engage in it. And why I really love that quote is because all of you in the jobs that you do, you add value and you create value out of information. And ultimately, it's that ability to think really clearly, to make really good decisions, to harbor that responsibility. That's what you get paid for. You don't get paid. No one has on their business card sending emails as their job title. Like really what you get paid for is having that responsibility, being able to see the wood from the trees, make good decisions, be creative, add value out of information. And really the only way to do that is to make sure you've got quality thinking space. Generally, when we feel stressed, we feel busy, when we feel under pressure, it's the first thing that goes. So even if you've just got something in your calendar saying, hey, I'm going to take some hours for thinking and planning, either you book over that or other people book over that. And similarly, just we feel more guilty about just taking that time out to go for a walk in the woods, or taking that time out to be with our families, or we tend to just cram too much stuff in. And that has a kind of double whammy effect. Firstly, it heightens the stress, but also it means that the brain doesn't have so much time to really get that self-awareness, figure out why we're stuck, think about how we're thinking, just get in touch with that slightly more sort of lizard brain instinct that we have. So really important. And one of the things I really hope that you'll take away from this is often the best way to unstick productivity is to do nothing and to create space and have that space in order to just really kind of let those thoughts bubble up, work out what your prioritization is. If you've ever been for just a walk around the block or just looked out to sea for 20 minutes and suddenly you have the answer to a thing that you've been struggling with for a while, you know exactly what I mean by this. Running is another one for me, where often when I'm running, I just put the pieces together, but we need to make sure that we're giving ourselves that space. And generally the lizard brain's kind of instinct when we're under stress and pressure is like, I want to just, get more and more into stuff rather than actually taking a step back and getting out of stuff. So really encourage you to think about today how you can make that space for yourself. And I'm just going to give you a quick diagnostic tool. So this is a little tool from Productivity Ninja. And what it really describes is how the lizard brain thinks about stuff that we're stuck on. So it's a diagnostic tool to think which of these 4 things is happening for me. And then there are different ways to solve those. So the first one is difficult. So I'm looking at a thing on my to-do list and why am I not getting started? If the reason is because it feels too difficult, then you need to change the action that's on your to-do list. The way to do that is to focus on not getting the thing done, but addressing whatever the skills gap is, right? So if it's difficult, the new action that you have is go and get some mentoring, go on some training, go and watch a YouTube tutorial, whatever it might be that overcomes that gap between knowledge and action, and kind of turning that around and not just having this thing, I need to get this thing done on my to-do list, but having I need to get the advice or get the training or get the knowledge or develop that skill in order to then be able to get that thing done. So that's difficult. Undefined, I'll talk more about that one in a second, in terms of how to define anything that you're working on. Scary. So sometimes the lizard brain gets scared, and particularly scared about the potential to screw things up, to look foolish. But also we sometimes get scared about things where we anticipate a really positive result, right? So the one that I'm going to just draw on really quickly, because it's the main thing that my life has been about for about the past 9 months, is I'm writing a book at the moment. And often when I find myself procrastinating on the book, it's like, oh, this could be so huge. And actually the prospect of it being a really big thing actually, makes part of my brain just want to cower away and not work on it and not bring that to fruition because of all the consequences that might come from that. And the final one is tedious. So this is why my mum would always do the ironing watching soap operas. You've got to make the thing that's tedious interesting. For me, that's about putting on podcasts or music or whatever and just crack through it. So it's tedious because it doesn't feel like there's any fun in it. So put some fun into that little window. That's the way to deal with those. So difficult, undefined, scary, tedious. And really it's about recognizing which of those things is causing your lizard brain to be stuck, and then using that information to then figure out how to unstick things. The one I left out there was undefined. So these are like the 2 things that basically all productivity is about, right? So it's about making sure that with any project that we have a very clearly defined project outcome. So not just what am I working on, but what do I want this to look like at the end? What's the quantifiable way of describing that? So rather than just run the conference, it's like run a conference that generates X number of revenue and has X number of attendees, has X number of website hits, whatever those formulas or metrics might be, and just figuring out what's the definition of success for anything we're working on. Much easier to work towards it when it's well defined. And then the other thing that we get stuck on often is those things in and of themselves are a big, sort of scary, nefarious thing. So you've got to break it down, and you've got to break it down particularly to have momentum and to be able to get things moving. We need to know what the next physical action is. When I say physical action, what I'm talking about is don't use words like I'm going to chase up that thing, or I'm going to start this thing. Actually break it down into the physicality of it. So I'm going to, get a pen and paper and brainstorm the ideas for the thing, or I'm going to use my phone to call this person who's going to give me the advice and the ideas to kick it off, whatever it might be. So actually having that sense of being a fly on the wall in your own office. What do you see yourself physically doing? Are you typing online? Are you on the phone? Are you sat there with post-it notes, like moving all around? So just figuring out what does that physicality look like is often a really good way of just kind of almost like tricking the brain into then when you get to come to start, your brain goes, oh yeah, I've been thinking about this for a while. Often the best bits of thinking that we develop happen kind of like while we're asleep and subconsciously and when we're on a run and all those kind of things. So thinking about that physicality can really, really help unstick things. And then the last thing I want to say before we go straight into some Q&A is just a quick word about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So if you're intrinsically motivated by something, it's often because you love autonomy or you have a real sense of purpose around the thing that you're doing. I mean, it's almost like the stuff that you would do anyway. If you weren't getting paid, if no one else is asking you to, this is the stuff that I would just love to do. And we all have some things in our lives that really feel like the motivation is with us and we're just dead keen to do it. And then we also, of course, all have lots of things in our lives which the motivation is extrinsic. So that's because I'm doing this because I'm hoping to get paid, or I'm doing this because I'm obligated to my boss, or I'm doing this because someone else tells me it's a good thing I need to do. And so we don't necessarily have the same motivations. And I think when it comes to things being stuck, what I'd say is use the extrinsic motivation to really acknowledge. So when something is an extrinsically motivated thing, use that in your head to really acknowledge, I need accountability here. I need to put a deadline in someone else's world. I need someone to bounce off with this, because if it's just down to me, I won't do it. So if it's intrinsic motivation, it's much, much easier, I think, to figure out how to unstick it. And then the trick is with the extrinsic stuff, for me, is about putting the deadline with somebody else, having that accountability, having that kind of sense that someone else is going to help me to get through this and get to the end of this. So just a little word there. You can read up lots more about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation online, but it's a really useful one just to be thinking about. So what we're going to do is Grace and I are going to field questions and answer them. We're going to be here until 2:45, and then little secret, we're actually going to be here till 3. So if you need to log off at 2:45, please do. But we'll do our regular after dark thing between 2:45 and school runs at 3 o'clock. So feel free to put your questions. If you can put them in the question and answer box, not in the chat, that would really help. Feel free to just fire in the chat any other thoughts you have, and any tips and tricks that you want to share as well. Because we've got we've got the brain power of 120 people online right now. So let's actually use that rather than it just be all me and Grace. But just as you start writing your questions in the Q&A box there, just a couple of other things that we've got coming up if you want to really dive into this stuff in a bit more detail. And the first one is being run by the inimitable Grace Marshall. That's your cue to talk about this.
That's my cue to talk, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So this is running next week, and it is a short, sharp, bite-sized session where you're going to be able to grab loads of tips, dive into those 9 characteristics that Graham mentioned earlier, and pick up some ideas and insights that might challenge you to think slightly differently about the way that you work, but also really practical tips and tools that you can start deploying straight away to make a difference.
Nice. And then if you want a slightly deeper dive, I do this once a year, and then some of our other ninjas do this once a year as well. 6 weeks to Ninja. So it's the only time I'm doing this over the next year or so. And it's basically a 6-week evening course, mainly on Zoom and with an accountability group on WhatsApp. So if you want some people to really help you to make all this stuff stick, then sign up for 6 weeks to Ninja. There's also a little promo code at the bottom of the page there as well. And you can sign up for that on Eventbrite. And if you want more details on either of those and just kind of want to find out a bit more, then you can email us. We'll give our email addresses at the end as well. I'm also working on this new book, which is all about kindness in leadership. And I'm going to be running this little program that starts over the next couple of weeks, which is called Kindful Leadership. And it's with my colleague, Christina Kisley in the States. And it's a really just a short exploration, again on Zoom, about what it means to be kind and what it means to be a kind leader, offering some tips and tricks to help with that. And really the idea is, this is the kind of starting point for a whole organization around kindful leadership, which we're hoping to build over the next year or so. So if you would like to get involved with that, then also details for that are on Eventbrite, and just type in kindful leadership and you'll see it there. And I also have a newsletter, grahamallcott.com, and you can sign up for my Rev Up for the Week emails. Basically, it's just an email every Sunday, goes out at 4:05 p.m. I just chose the time randomly. And it's just every week a positive or productive idea for the week ahead. So if you want to sign up for that, just go to grahamallcott.com. Right, let's get into the good stuff, Grace Marshall.
Absolutely.
You want to start with some questions?
Yeah, definitely. Loads of really good questions coming in. I'm going to start with a question about starting. Actually, this is a combination of 2 different questions. So Catherine says, where do you start when there's so much to do? I've just returned to work following a couple of weeks off doing mum stuff before returning to school, and there are just so many emails, so many things to do, things that were waiting to be done before I went off, plus all the stuff that needs to be done around the home. And similarly, Dominic is also saying, how do you avoid overwhelm stopping you from focusing and resulting in you doing nothing? Yeah. So I think those 2 are very similar questions.
Yeah, nice. I'll say a couple of things to that. So let's start with email. And it can be difficult at this time of year when you come back and there's you've been on holiday with the kids or whatever, and you come back and there's just like piles of emails. Everyone's probably come across at some point the 80-20 rule, where 20% of what you do adds 80% of the impact. I think email is the same, but it's more like the 800-20 rule. So one thing is just to take a step back from that sense with email that, I've now got all these things to do, and recognize that there'll be a very small number of things that actually have value within that. So don't be fooled by the number of unread emails that you see and think that, okay, there's 180 of those, that means I've got 180 things to do. Far from it. So I think that's just a nice perspective on email. We have a workshop called getting your inbox to zero. And there's a whole chapter in Productivity Ninja on literally just walking you through how to do that. It takes about an hour and a half for most people. So if email is a stress, then that's a really good way of dealing with it. But then the other thing about just feeling overwhelmed in general, one of the exercises that we do in some of our workshops, and there's a whole week actually on the 6 weeks to Ninja that does this, is literally just to do a brain dump. So before you get into tasks, if you feel like that sense of overwhelming you before you start, don't just start working on something and just allow that sort of feeling to just sort of fester within you, because it only gets worse. I would say sit down with a pen and paper and literally just spend some time just getting everything out of your head. Just write down all those things and just dump it onto the page. So psychologists call this distributed cognition, which basically means once you get everything on the page in front of you, it's actually much easier to manipulate it, to be more objective with it, to start to problem solve it. If it's all flowing around in your head, because your head is not a really, really good place to hold lots of information. If anyone's ever played that game, I went to the shops and I bought, you'll know what I mean. It's really hard to remember all those things, and our short-term memory isn't really set up for that. David Allen, who wrote Getting Things Done, has a lovely quote: the mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. So get it all out of your head, get it onto paper, and you'll start to, what I find when I'm coaching people with this stuff is even just doing that, you'll feel way less overwhelmed. And also then from there, you can start applying those 2 things we talked about before. What's the desired project outcome with this? What's the next physical action with this? And those 2 elements of what's the end point and what's the next thing? That's what you need with each of those to really start to kind of overcome the overwhelm. Grace, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd say, that often people feel like, oh, there's so much to do, I need to get on with the doing. But I think what you talk about there is like, let's do the thinking first, and that's going to help us with the doing. And I think
sure.
that whole thing of just prioritizing thinking is so counterintuitive, but it's so worth it. And the other thing I would say as well is sometimes at the start of a new season, what I find really helpful when things feel overwhelming is like, rather than all the stuff, it's like almost kind of labeling, what is this season? So what's this season about, or even what is today about? So giving it a label, giving it a theme helps me to then go, okay, I don't have to do all the things or be everything for everybody right now, like all the time. I can just be like, today is about this. And then that helps me to feel like lower the overwhelm.
Let's do another question, but just while you're choosing one, Grace, just one thing to add to that counterintuitive thing. There's a lovely Buddhist phrase, which is you should meditate for half an hour a day, except when you're busy, then you should meditate for an hour a day. And I think that really encapsulates that sense of how important making space for what matters is, how important that quality thinking is, and also just how difficult that is to do when you just feel like the world's burning and there's 100 things, So another question.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned email, so let's talk about email. Alex says, I work in a culture of email ping pong. How do I start telling people that I'm not playing? But because I'm busy working, etc., without eroding relationships, especially when those who are, there are people in my world who are quite busy with email.
Yeah, I would say two things about email and changing culture. So one is you can make some new rules for yourself to an extent. So do that. I'll talk about that more in a second. And the second is really it's about culture. The thing about culture with email that I find a lot, and I think it's the same really as when it comes to culture around how to use WhatsApp or how people are using Slack or whatever else. I think there's an awful lot that goes on sort of like below the table. So everyone has all these assumptions. Everyone's thinking about what the rules are and what their expectations are. And actually, because those things are never brought onto the table and actually discussed and sort of thrashed out properly, then they're never really that clearly defined. The general trend is that the junior people in organizations tend to hold themselves to really high standards out of fear. So it's like, I need to get back to clients within 20 minutes or whatever. Whereas the higher up, the hierarchy you go, people tend to be a bit more relaxed about it. And there's just a disconnect between that, and people don't tend to have that conversation kind of as part of a team meeting, kind of actually discussing it properly and objectively. So not discussing it because you missed something, but just discussing it because it's a really important conversation around the rules of the road. So I think have that conversation and try and facilitate that. And the lovely thing about that is you'll definitely find that you're not alone. There'll be other people on your team who are also frustrated by the ping pong thing. And then when it comes to the rules, I think there's a couple of things you can do. So Cal Newport's written this new book, and he talks in this, and the book's called A World Without Email, which is a very optimistic title, I have to say. But he talks around this concept of the hyperactive hive mind. So basically, we can organize things by the hyperactive hive mind, which is everybody pitching in all the time, or we can organize stuff where actually where we get better work done is where people have more time and space to do what Cal also calls deep work, which we call proactive attention, right? So using your attention in a really great way. And I think you can still reclaim a bit of your own time and attention to do some of that much more quality deep dive work, generally by having some time where you just close out, look down, or just get off email. And yeah, so I hear you with that thing about relationships. You've got to have a balance there. You can't just say, I'm only going to check email once a day. And I think people find those out of office things that Tim Ferriss talks about in 4 Hour Work Week, like the kind of, in order to be more efficient, I am going to only check email once a day. People find that a bit obnoxious, so I'd be careful about using those. But yeah, I think
you can get creative about those though. I have
you
seen
can maybe
really
get creative about it, but I do think just setting some intentions for yourself, and the one that I think pretty much everybody can do is try and find time in the first hour of your day, if not set aside the first hour of your day, to be just about quality, proactive attention, deep work and thinking before you even open email. And that's possible for most people, even if it means that you shift to doing 8 till 4 instead of 9 till 5 or something. But just even that one thing, you'd be amazed at what you can get done with an hour a day, and how little you're then stressed about the rest of the email ping pong just by doing that. So yeah, personal and cultural.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I think my favorite out of office one that I saw was somebody who basically said something along the lines of, as a result of childhood hyperactivity, I actually have trouble focusing. Oh, squirrel. So to help me to be able to get my work done for you, I only look at my emails once a day or whatever it is. If you need me more urgently than that, please do give me a call. So I think you can, sometimes depending on the relationship you have with the people you work with, you can maybe be a little bit playful and creative around that as well.
Yeah, there's also that thing that sometimes what happens is if you do just check out of email for 2 or 3 hours and check back in, you'll find that things actually got solved, they got done, then you don't need to be inputting them. So it's another one of those slightly contradictory things, that the less time you spend on email, the less time you need to spend on email.
Yeah, okay. There's quite a few people here asking about working remotely. So your work feels very different now that we're remote or hybrid, and there's the feeling that what was working before doesn't seem to be working now. Any tips around that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff around just the dynamics of space, right? And just, I think often culture at work comes from physical spaces. The chats around the water cooler, like going into the meeting rooms, huddling around the whiteboard or whatever it is, and we don't have that now. But I do think there are ways of recreating some of that. Comes back slightly to what we talked about before of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So some of those things so I'll give you a think productive example. When we started the company, we adopted this thing, which was from a book called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish. And his daily huddle basically had a number of different questions. And he said that you should always ask yourself every day, how are we progressing towards our one key metric? So for Think Productive in the beginning, that was, that one key metric was how many workshops have we sold? How many workshops are we going to sell this month? What's the revenue from that? And so that one little metric about sales, we would ask that question every single day. And what he says is, and this is a classic extrinsic motivation thing, because basically no one really wants to do sales. I didn't start the company thinking like, whoa, let's be a salesperson. It's like just not the interest at all. Like the interest is doing the work. But yeah, what happens is when you ask that question every day, then you kind of make yourself really uncomfortable when you're not seeing progress. And so as a result of that, it just motivates everybody because you're kind of in that space together. So I think you can do some of those things even when you're working remotely. I really like the idea of, so there's a new company called Focus Bubbles, which is actually run by one of Think Productive's ninjas in Canada. The idea is you're kind of online with a group of people for 45 minutes, for an hour. And, I think particularly if you're freelance and you don't have colleagues, having that thing where you sort of deep dive in. I did one similarly for a little while, a writing group. So it's basically 8 till 9 every morning, and everyone just logs on. You can see everybody else working away, and somehow there's some reassurance that other people are doing this too, and they're holding you slightly accountable because your camera's on, and they can see if you're just skiving or whatever. But yeah, just having that kind of creating those spaces for kind of group interaction, I think. And also social interaction too, right? So not making everything about a thing and about a project. Really important when working from home. And then the other thing I just want to say about working from home is you can still do a commute that helps you make space for what matters. So walk around the block, walk the dog if you have one. Spend a bit longer than just the school run, and just and sort of continue that journey a little bit. Use that as your transition, and it actually will help the brain to kind of get into work mode once you get back to your desk. Do you want to add anything to that one, Grace? It feels like that could be we could do the whole thing about it.
Well, we do a whole workshop on it, so we could definitely go on. I'd say also zoning your days as well. So like if everything's happening from home, it's like the same space. It feels like Groundhog Day sometimes. So I find myself playing around with having different types of music on in the background, maybe just sitting at a different angle of the desk. Sometimes little things like that can help to break it up as well.
Change the view.
Yeah, definitely.
That's super important for me when I'm writing, is like I get so bored and a little bit mad by just being sat in the same place. And last week I actually went up to my parents' house, and I just got so much done because I was just like, no, I'm in a different space, and just kind of jolts your brain into a different way of focusing. Yeah.
Speaking of writing, Kathy is asking how to actually get started on writing a book. Any tips on that?
Yeah, my advice for anyone who says, I'm thinking about writing a book. What should I do? My advice is always don't. And being totally real about it, and if, I've encouraged a few people to think about if it's because you want to get a kind of giant business card, which a book often is, and let's be honest, when I wrote Productivity Ninja, that was the idea. There are other ways to get a giant business card that are probably much less painful than writing a book. But I think if you still want to write a book after that, I would say be under absolutely no illusion about how much work a book is. And I'm currently writing book 6, which I'm saying it's my 6th and final book. But I kind of say that about every single one, that it's the final one, mainly because when you think you're done, which is when you've written a first draft, you're about a third of the way there. So it's a huge, huge undertaking. And I would say the only way to, if that's really your focus, I would say really the first thing is do a massive inventory of everything else that you're committed to in your life, and see how many of those things you can put on hold or put on the back burner or remove yourself from or whatever. Before I've done a couple of the other books, I've resigned from charity boards and stuff like that, because it's like, I just know, the impact of those things. And you just have to be totally committed to make that happen. So that would be my starting point. What's your starting point, Grace?
I think related to that, I would say know why you're doing it. So what is it? What's in it for me? And I think that also then helps you to decide what book you want to write, because like sometimes that whole starting point, like, oh, I could write about this, I could write about that. So what do you want it to do for you is probably a really good place to start. The other thing I often say to people is if you have committed to writing a book, just write the first book, because sometimes you can feel like you put a lot of pressure on yourself to go, oh, I'm writing a book. It's got to be good. It's got to be the best thing ever. So sometimes I find it helps to lower the stakes a little bit, to go, well, this doesn't have to be the best book ever that I'm ever going to do. It's just going to be the first. Just write the first book, get it out there. And then if the whole experience hasn't put you off entirely, you can write the next one. So if there's other things that come up afterwards, you can also write the next one. I just find that helps to contain it a little bit rather than make it feel like it's the most important thing.
Yeah, there's a quote which is apparently not actually Ernest Hemingway, but is always attributed to Ernest Hemingway. And this isn't just about writing books. This is about most things that we do when it comes to productivity, which is the first draft of everything is shit. So just being really okay with the idea of, as Grace was saying, just get all the ideas down. Don't try and make it the best thing ever. That comes with the edit. Like, your job at the beginning is just write the shit one, just get it on the page. I think that applies to most work that we do, to be honest. And another little phrase I love is that proverb which says, better an imperfect dome in Florence than a castle in the sky. I think sometimes we get so wound up with trying to make something perfect before we started that we don't start, and it's just get on with it, and actually just don't. And you need to get out of your own way by reducing those hang-ups and reducing that kind of lizard brain concern for what the negative reviews might look like.
Question here from Charlotte says, my job has quite a lot of firefighting that needs to get sorted, so my schedule can change a lot day to day. This means it's hard to schedule what I think of my real work. So projects I need to actually deliver. Do you have any tips for how to approach this kind of overwhelm?
Yeah, so one other thing, if you looked at my Outlook diary, let me start with the caveat. The caveat is your Outlook diary does not need to look like mine. Right, to get that out of the way, remember that whilst we talk about this. But if you looked at my Outlook diary, because I'm writing a book at the moment, basically the morning, sort of 9 until 12, 9 till 1, depending on the day, is blocked out. So no one can book me during that time. I do have a little bookings link that I send out to people to sort of book me in for meetings and stuff. And my assistant's doing some of that, but like that is really kind of sacred time. And so the great thing about that is it creates a constraint. So because I know that that's the time for, in my sense, that's my version of the real work that you're just talking about, then that means the constraint is all the other stuff has to fit into the afternoons. So that's why I gave you the caveat at the beginning, because that might not fit with your own routine. But I would say just recognize that there's a lot of stuff that needs to fit into our working day that we don't put in our calendar. And then we wonder why we're stuck, right? So I'd even think about having some time booked into your calendar every day for this is the time I'm going to nail the inbox or get the inbox back down to 0, whatever that looks like. Some time in your week where you're putting it in to say this is going to be when I'm doing quality thinking and planning. And we haven't talked about weekly reviews yet, which we might talk about in a minute, but having that booked in. Weekly reviews only work if you book them in the diary, I think, and have a real sense that that's part of a rhythm and part of your week. But the real benefit of that is not that people then can't book you during those times. The benefit is it shows you immediately and visually how little time you actually have for those things that are the real work. And just then how important it really is to get the scheduling right of those, or kind of, the discipline to keep to time when you do have that time. So I think for me, that's a really important way of focusing on it, is just kind of you playing with the idea of constraint and recognizing that, ultimately, if you have 2 or 3 hours of really focused quality attention every day, you get loads done. But also there's hours and hours of stuff that we're not thinking about that will have to happen in that week too. So, attention is in short supply.
Yeah, definitely. I think it feels like when you feel like you're herding cats, you've got to sort of ring fence it. And so I think it's that thing of ring fencing, you're protecting your own attention, but also ring fencing some of the other stuff. So, I know some people who maybe have like a question time. If they're the sort of person who gets asked a lot of questions, it might be have a set time when I look and deal with questions, rather than dealing with them individually as they come in. Also want to point out a really nice comment here by Megan earlier in the chat, saying, I was on focus time yesterday and was trying so hard to ignore a question that came in. By the time I decided I was going to respond after I'd finished what I was doing, the person had gone and found the answer for themselves. So it didn't stop me working, and they had a self-learning moment. So I think it comes back to, you mentioned the lizard brain earlier, that sometimes the lizard brain has us in a mode where we feel like everything is urgent and everything is therefore important. But actually, sometimes we just apply that level of urgency to it. So being slightly less available can be a good habit to get ourselves into, and to get other people into as well.
And particularly, if you're in a sort of very busy email ping pong sort of culture, the idea of stepping out of that culture, you're going to get FOMO. You're going to have that feeling of like, oh, I'm not being seen. I might be missing out on stuff. And what I'd say to that is just try it for a few days and notice how little, what actually the consequences are positive. Megan's thing really proves that, like the consequences are really good.
So you mentioned reviewing. Let's talk about reviewing. We've had a few questions on that. Yanni says, I really struggle with reviewing. I know what I need to do, but for some reason I find it really difficult to actually do that. Any tips?
Firstly, me too. It's the hardest thing. Right, so let's start with that. Those of you who are not familiar, if you Google Think Productive weekly checklist, it'll take you to a blog post with a really nice template, and you can write a nice checklist for your weekly review. The idea of the review is you're literally reviewing where you're up to and what's on your plate, and just getting everything very current and really kind of sort of couching everything in the present moment. Most of the time when we're working, we're reflecting on the stuff that we haven't done or that we think we did badly, and we're worrying about the future, and we're not in the present. So weekly review is an amazing discipline, because what it does is it really allows you to kind of say to yourself, where am I up to right now? And then what do the next few days need to look like as a consequence of that? So it's a really, really important discipline. It's really hard to make it work. I'd say a couple of things that have helped me over the years, and then Grace, maybe you can give us your little tips. So as I said before, having it in the diary as a thing, really important, so that it's there, and it's ring fenced and respected by the people closest to you as well. So make sure your boss knows about it, any other colleagues, and that's your review time. I would say find a location that really works for you. For years, I did most of my weekly reviews on the train, because I was going on the train from London at the time up to Birmingham for Aston Villa games. So I just do it on a Saturday morning, and it was a really nice use of what's otherwise kind of dead time in a way. And trains are a really nice place to kind of think. And likewise, if you've got a really nice cafe that's got a really nice view near you, go to the cafe. So make it a thing where it's couched in a place. Again, it kind of switches the brain into that mode. Weekly review buddies. So find someone else in your team who also has the motivation around doing this. And then it comes back to what I talked about before, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So have you ever noticed how you're much less likely to let down someone else as you are to let down yourself? So if you've got that time in the diary, you both meet up, you both doing your independent reviews, you're not talking to each other, but you can just see that both of you are just kind of in that zone. Maybe you coach each other and help each other a bit, but I've seen people doing this where it actually is, the way it works best is kind of, it's in silence, but you're both there to not let each other down, and then you get it done. So that's a really great way of trying to make it stick. And then, yeah, sharing the results of it. I do find that, I can go a couple of weeks missing it, and then I just do a really big one, and then I'm kind of back in the zone with it. So you will miss weeks, and just be okay with that. But share the results of it. So when you have a really nice win, and as often happens on a weekly review, you get these massive light bulb moments because you're just really entrenched in thinking about stuff properly, and you go, oh, I could put that with that. I've just saved 4 hours over. Share those results because it helps you to see the benefit of it, and it also just helps other people to respect it more.
Yeah, definitely. I find, so one of the things I do at the end, towards the end of the weekly review is the questions. It's like, what kind of questions do I ask myself? And sometimes those are the things that I'll share. So if I'm working with a coach, or if I'm part of a mastermind group or something like that, I'll use that as my check-in. And definitely for me, I'm very much someone who's motivated by accountability to other people. So yeah, for me, knowing that I'll be sharing that with someone makes me do it a lot more. And also it then becomes something I look forward to, because I get to the end of like, oh, those are my insights that I'm taking away from that.
Nice. We are 3 minutes from our advertised finish time, which is 2:45. As I said before, we're actually going to hang around till 3 o'clock after dark, and just carry on with more questions. So if you are able to stick around till 3, please do. But what we should do is the early bird crew who got here before 2 o'clock put their questions in the chat first, so in the Q&A first. So should we go from the top, Grace, and just do one final one before we bring the formal bit to a close?
Okay, so Sarah says, my main issue is prioritizing. I spent years in the private sector where I just worked late if needed, but now I work part-time in the charity sector and I really need to prioritize. Yeah,
so I would say one thing that actually really helps me with prioritization is the weekly review, because it really allows you to see in just a much more complete way everything that you're committed to, and you start to, that's a really nice way, I think, to start making good judgments about what's having the biggest impact, what are the things that I can renegotiate and change. And then I'd say a couple of other things. One is, it is okay to renegotiate your commitments. And this is like a really, I think it's something that we're sort of taught from childhood, like, your word is your bond. As soon as you've said you're doing something, you should always do it. And maybe just the world's moved on around you, and that thing that everybody enthusiastically committed to in the meeting a month ago, it's actually no longer that important. So it's really fine to go back to your boss and say, actually, with everything else I've got going on, I kind of feel like this is something that we should probably renegotiate and change. So it's fine to renegotiate your commitments, and much easier to see the need to do that when you do a weekly review. And then the other thing I'm going to say, and again, this is a really, it's a difficult thing, because it feels like it's kind of unprogramming, unlearning stuff that we learned in school. It's just the art of saying no. Like, it's just, so much of productivity is about what you say no to and not what you say yes to. Warren Buffett has this lovely quote about saying no, which is the difference between successful people and really successful people is that the really successful people say no to almost everything. And everybody needs to get better at saying no, me included. I think it's a journey for us all. And one thought on that may help is, I asked somebody to be on my podcast a little while ago who I really admired, and they said no, but they said no in the nicest, most respectful, compassionate way that actually increased my sort of sense of respect for them. So to not think of no as a kind of 0 and 1 game where, like, if I say no, I'm kind of losing status, I'm losing something in the relationship by doing that, I'm letting them down. Find the way that actually means that you're gaining something by saying no. Maybe that's helping them in some other way or whatever, but just like seeing it that it doesn't have to be a 0-sum kind of game, and you can actually gain kudos from saying no, I think is a really empowering thought.
Yeah,
absolutely. If you want to add about that, Grace, I kind of feel like
I think
we're pretty good on.
Definitely. I think there's something about boundaries and boundaries as a tool for communicating value. So we often think of boundaries as, saying no is like a door shut, like I'm not going to help you, but actually, there's something about boundaries when you do them well, help to communicate value. And I talk about that in this whole chapter on tough love, setting boundaries and saying no in the Yellow Book, How to Be Really Productive. So I think it's, if you think about, if you have to phone a restaurant and go, oh, have you got any space for tonight? And they're like, no, you need to book it a week ahead. Does that reduce the value in your mind, or does it increase it? So there is something about communicating boundaries that helps to increase value.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right, so I'll do this. And now we are officially after dark. So if you're still here, good to have you for the after dark section. So we're just going to carry on and do some more Q&A for the next 15 minutes or so.
Cool. And to answer a quick question that's popped up in the chat about recording, yes, there will be a recording. It will be shared. Keep an eye on, it will probably be either in your inbox or on the YouTube channel, but yeah, definitely the recording will be shared. Question from Colin. I've cracked Capture and Collect and projects lists. So Colin's clearly read How to Be a Productivity Ninja, but I continue to get stuck in that loop and I don't get to the doing. Any tips to focus on the doing and ignore that Capture and Collect loop as appropriate?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because I see that dynamic slightly different, which is, I think, capturing and collecting information, but then, so yeah, the discipline for me is about capturing and collecting information. So writing down the idea, saving the email, whatever it might be, but resisting the temptation in that moment to then go down the rabbit hole of organizing it, right? So just having good either physical or digital spaces to allow that stuff to pile up. Inbox is a really classic one. I actually have just over there next to my desk, like a proper in and out tray, like the old fashioned in and out trays. And the reason I have that is because I can scribble stuff down, scribble ideas, chuck it in there. I use my Todoist mobile app as well. Like, so if I'm just kind of out and about and then just something pops up, capture and collect it and forget about it. So the thing that makes that really important is that you will interrupt yourself. And the biggest interruption we have is ourselves with our own ideas and our own stresses and all that sort of stuff. So capturing that so that you can just stay in the zone of the thing you're working on is a really great thing. I think if you're then going down the rabbit hole of then how to organize it and where does it fit and like starting on it and it's distracting you, then what I'd say is probably what you're actually really missing is the review part. Because I think once you have the review, you know that there's always a catch-all to deal with those. You know that you're regularly getting that kind of big picture, and then it's kind of easier to stay focused as a result of that. So I hope that helps. And I love the question, Colin, because it feels like it comes from a very informed place in terms of the way you're thinking about those habits. And Grace, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think I do a similar thing. I call it my tangent log. So, when I'm in doing mode, it's like anything that comes to mind that needs capturing, like write it on the tangent log, because that'll take me off a tangent otherwise. But I think also just like what helps you to get into worker mode, like, because that's what doing is, isn't it? It's that worker mode. And, I don't know, it's like almost kind of like, do you need to put a hat on? Do you need to like, so almost tell yourself, right, I'm in worker mode now, here's the thing I need to do. Sometimes I will write that thing that I'm doing on a post-it note and stick it to the screen. So if I'm tempted to look somewhere else and I've gone down a rabbit hole, that physical thing's still right there on the screen to go do this. This is what you're supposed to be doing right now. Another one on the second brain. So Nikki says, I'm using Todoist as my second brain, but I seem to be struggling between the @action folder in my email and the Todoist things to do, to the point that I'm wondering if I'm spending too much time trying to be productive.
And I suppose that I'm gonna improvise the question for you, Nikki, which is basically, and this is a really important thing, how to spend as little time on the tech and the organizing as possible and just get more stuff done, because I think that's a really important component. I think people do get too perfectionist sometimes around, and there's a certain type of person that likes everything to be so well ordered and structured that you're very susceptible then to becoming a bit perfectionist around the tech and how you're using Todoist and all that kind of stuff. On that really specific geeky thing about @action folder on your email and then the Todoist, the kind of digital to-do list, you can actually within Todoist I don't know if you know about this, but you can forward emails and they'll go straight into Todoist. So you will have a Todoist email address and then you can forward them in. So if you wanted to, you could manage it all from one place. I don't necessarily think that's the best way of doing it. And actually, I will have actions in my action folder and other stuff in Todoist, and they will be, so both of those together becomes almost like the second brain. But I'm not going to spend loads of time writing out all the things that are emails into Todoist, because that would just be, time spent gathering the same information. I don't feel the need to have that sense of control. So it's probably a really good question to just remind us with the answer that the aim of all of this and second brains is to spend as little time in there as you can get away with, but also as much time as you need to feel clear and in control. So once you feel clear and in control, then the idea is that you just get on with the work. You're in that worker mode, as Grace said, and you're not having to spend time any more time than needed in that kind of boss mode thinking about the work.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sort of managing other people's expectations. So I've got a couple of related questions here. Megan says, how do you manage other people's expectations of productivity when they're assigning tasks? So for example, they might think a task will take an hour, but I know it will take me 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
But also similarly, Kirsty's just popped into the chat. How do you identify the point when there is actually too much for you to do alone? And no matter how good your ninja skills are, you really need more resource to get everything done. I'm partway along the ninja journey. I have a strong suspicion that I need more people added to my team.
Yes. So one thing real quick on that part of it is that, that really old phrase, if you want something doing, ask a busy person, and it's on it. So I think there is a genuine thing here, which is like, you can sort of become the victim of your own success around productivity because people look at you as being a productive person, so they just give you more work. So I think it's really important to move this from what I would term as like a subjective conversation, where it's like you're talking to your boss and you both have a subtext of judgment. And, if I'm pushing back on work, it feels like I'm then being judged for not doing enough or not pulling my weight or whatever. And that can feel very difficult, that kind of subjective conversation. But moving it from subjective into objective, which is where the focus is not on the work, not on you, but it's more on the work itself. So having a really good project list that really breaks down, here's all the commitments that I have, here are all the things I've been given to do, here's all the ongoing stuff that I'm also tasked with doing as part of the job or whatever. And being able to kind of quantify that and sort of put that together in a way that gives your boss the overview of it means that it's almost like the dynamic becomes the two of you sat together side by side looking at the stuff, rather than, the two of you sat at opposite ends of the desk kind of judging each other. So I think that's really the most important thing, is getting that dynamic right and giving them data, giving them as much, sort of quantifiable data around what those commitments look like. And they'll really appreciate that, right? Like the fact that you've actually sat and gone, actually, this is 3 hours work and this is this. And they'll appreciate and respect and be impressed by the fact that you've thought about it to that extent. So I would start there. And really the way to get to that data, again, is like, have a really good capture and collect, have a really good organize and regular review.
Yeah, I find it's also really useful to have those kind of no conversations. So like, what do I need to say no to? But as a team, like, what do we need to say no to? I mean, we've done that thing productive, haven't we? And there've been things where we've gone, but we really like doing that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it's like, no, we need to say no to that because we need
really
to make space
difficult.
for
Yeah. I mean, it's like death in work is a really difficult thing, right? So just mourning things that we used to do and we don't need to anymore. This has been the way we've done it for so long. Why would we change? All that stuff. And you have to kind of have, it only happens if you force it to happen. And it's really important that it does. So we do a thing on some of our away days, which we kind of borrowed it from Brewdog, which is the idea of smash shit up. And so the idea is we literally, it's like a open forum to say, what are we doing that's unnecessary? What are we doing that takes too much time? What are we doing that doesn't add enough value? And then it's kind of anonymous post-it notes. So people can just write up these meetings, then like no one turns up. It's not great, but you can put all that up there. And then I generally am the one to read them out because I don't know everybody's handwriting. And so everybody gets to say those things. And often what happens is someone goes, oh, you've raised that. Oh, thank God, I wasn't brave enough to put that one in. But actually just, renewal is often about clearing the decks and kind of getting stuff that doesn't need to be done, and remove it. And again, it's that classic renegotiating thing. Like, we just don't do it. As humans, we spend a lot of time creating new things for ourselves, but not enough time looking for what needs to be dismantled or taken away or changed.
Brilliant. Here's a fun one for you. So Rody says, I know we should avoid unnecessary meetings as much as we can. However, if we do need to set one, would it be better to schedule it in the first half of the day or the second half?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, it's one of those, isn't it? It's like, I remember doing wine tasting in Australia, and like, you get this whole thing with wine, it's like really snobby, and then you go to Australia and like, what's the best wine? And they just go, oh, it's the wine you like. I just think there's like, sometimes it's like, schedule it whenever you feel it is best to schedule it is like the first thing to say. But I would say, when we think about people's levels of attention, so people tend to have their best energy and attention in the morning, and it wanes a bit more in the afternoon. Now, for me personally, I schedule all my meetings in the afternoon because I know that if I've got someone else in front of me, it sort of forces me to have a bit more energy. And I know I'll more naturally have that energy in the morning. So it kind of feels like I'm squeezing a bit more out of myself just in terms of good attention, by having my meetings in the afternoon and using that morning time and protecting that morning time. So if that's you and your team, then I would say afternoons more than mornings. And again, I think as we talk about with email and culture, I feel like having some of those conversations about when are your best hours in the day. What I talk about in Productivity Ninja is you have 2 to 3 hours every day of what I call proactive attention. So the time when you're really energized, switched on, able to do the most complex stuff on your list. Then use that time for the kind of solo deep dive stuff, or also use that time for the meetings where you really need like full, like everybody's concentration. It's like the most important meeting you're going to have that quarter or something. Do those in the morning, right? Because you kind of need everyone's real energy into that. But I think that's just a really important sort of thing to have a conversation with the team around, like when are we best? What are our preferences around this? Who's got childcare and school runs, as I have in about 3 minutes? But just like what are the other practicalities around that too? And I think it's just stuff that we just don't talk about enough. Like, I feel like the amount of times I go into organizations and just no one's got any idea about when other people's preferences are, or how they like to work, or the mediums people like to communicate, all that stuff. It's just stuff that people assume and they don't really talk about enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, you've got a minute.
I've got like about 3 minutes, Grace. How are you doing? Are you?
Well, I have a call to jump on at 3, so I'm going to have to say
all right,
goodbye.
so you pop out of your screen, and then I'll do like maybe 1 or 2 more, and then
brilliant.
And we'll...
Great stuff.
But thank you, award-winning author Grace Marshall, for being with us. Always a pleasure.
Come and play along.
You're very welcome. Let's do a couple more before we finish. The 57 of you who are still here, thank you for being here. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I've got this weekly email called Rev Up for the Week. So I just give one positive or productive idea for the week ahead. And do you know what? Whenever I do those, I've never really run out of ideas for the weeks, but people have sometimes just sent me ideas. So if I haven't got to your question and you want it answered, email me, graham@thinkproductive.co.uk, or just reply to any of those Rev Up emails when you're subscribed with your question, with the topic that you want me to cover, and then I'll write about it on one of the future weeks. And that's happened a couple of times recently, and people have been so happy that like they email me, and then like 2 weeks later, their whole Sunday email is their question back to them. Nikki is asking, is dust covered in the Ninja Productivity book? Yes, it is. It's in the do chapter around procrastination. Nikki, thank you. Can you talk a little about doing a weekly... Oh, I've just scrolled and lost it. Can you talk a little about doing a weekly review? I've of course read your book, but wondered if there's any new thinking with the virtual world in mind. Yeah, no, I think I'm quite... I guess I'm quite sort of traditional about that. So I do it literally I have a Word document that has the checklist on it. I print that out physically. And the reason I do that is so that I can kind of split screen and have the checklist in front of me and not on the screen. and then I use the screen, and often two screens actually, to do the thinking. So I have often have Google open if I need to research stuff, and then I'll have like Todoist open for the actual tasks and stuff, maybe even the email open. So sometimes it's kind of 3 or 4 different screens. But I think physical space is a really important part of that, and that's why I kind of print things out and go to different places. I'm gonna do one more, and then I'm gonna run and do the score one. I have real trouble with others interrupting. How can I help them to understand I need some focus time? So we did talk about that a little bit, just in terms of the sort of having conversations as a team, I think is a really important thing. Physical symbols, if you're in an open plan office, can be really good. So whenever I've got my headphones on, that means don't interrupt me. If it's like your immediate team, you can kind of tell them that's the rule. Elena, who is Think Productive's MD, when we shared an office together before we went remote, she had a little China cat. So when the China cat was on the desk, that was like, don't bother Elena. So little physical signifiers can be good there. I'm gonna do one more. Let's see if I can pick a short one. Nikki, you've put like more questions in. Which day do I do my weekly review? How long do I spend on them? That's easy. Thursday mornings is when I do. And to be honest, mine at the moment, because I haven't done one for about 3 weeks because I've just been on holiday, basically. But yeah, if I haven't done one the week before, it's at least 2 hours, probably 2.5 hours. If I'm in the zone and doing them every week, it's kind of like an hour to an hour and a half, something like that. But yeah, and we've done, I think there's probably something on YouTube specifically that we've done around weekly reviews. So you might want to take that out on YouTube as well. And I'll do one more. What do you do when the lists become too long and completely overwhelming? And the answer to that is you go and have a beer. Thank you so much for being here. 47 of you still here. I'm so happy that you're still here for our After Dark. So thank you for that. Whenever I do these free webinars, there's always an After Dark. So if you're jumping on one in future, then just know that you can schedule that little secret time. For the extra bits, sign up to Rev Up for the Week. I'd love some of you to join this Kindful Leadership thing that we're starting in a couple of weeks' time. And also 6 Weeks in Ninja starts in November. Join me for those. It's really nice to be back in work mode, and someone said at the beginning, having a conversation with adults again, uninterrupted. Really cool. But yeah, have a great rest of the afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot. All right.